Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at the ironically called mid-tower case from Thermaltake. This is the Tower 500. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at Thermaltake's The Tower 500. This is the one we all saw coming. After the Tower 100 and obviously the Tower 900, which are its smaller and bigger siblings, yeah, the 500 was an obvious choice. They've had the audacity to call this a mid-tower chassis, which, as you can probably guess, I've actually had to move the camera back significantly and actually get a different tripod just to get the thing into the frame. It's huge. It is absolutely massive, and I would say in terms of size, it's really a full tower plus. In terms of height, obviously in terms of width, it's considerably a lot wider than your traditional PC cases, but with this kind of design, it does offer up a lot of potential things you can do with it. Clearly, air cooling, water cooling, lots of different radiator configurations, huge graphics cards, very, very elaborate setups. Now, clearly, if you're after an elaborate setup, this is definitely worth a look. If you're looking for something a little bit more simplistic and just is an airflow based chassis, realistically the traditional EATX form factor is probably what you're going to be looking for. But like I said, if you do want something a little bit different and want to stick out from the crowd a little bit, the Tower 500 might be just the thing for you. So in today's video we're going to go through, do a teardown of the case, look at some of the pros, some of the cons. We'll be putting a system into here, do some testing, see what it's actually like in terms of thermals, and yeah, at the end we'll come back with my final thoughts. And obviously feel free to comment below and let me know what you think. So let's start off with some of the things which we get as accessories. So there are two mounting brackets which are included. Now these are designed so you can attach either a 360 or 240mm radiator into the chassis. There's only two of these brackets unfortunately, and you will need two for each setup. So if you can imagine, you can mount fans onto here and put them into either side of the case. There are mounting options either side, which you're probably seeing from some B-roll we filmed a little bit earlier. Also included is a instruction guide, which to be fair, you probably will need. There are so many configuration flexibilities, options. Yeah, it's probably worth keeping this handy when you're doing your first couple of builds, just so you can kind of work out where everything goes. It's relatively straightforward and is very modular. And if you're of a similar age group to myself and you've used Meccano as a younger child, or Lego for that matter, then yeah, that is what you're going to be relying on when you're doing a build in this thing. Also included is an absolute ton of cable ties, screws and accessories here, so some mounting pads, all that kind of stuff. It's very handy, and again, because there is so much flexibility in here for installing parts in weird and unusual places, you probably will be relying on that bag quite a lot. So let's take a quick tour around the outside of the case. Let's start off with the front, as that is what you can see at the moment. So one of the first things you're going to notice is the I/O section. So Thermaltake have actually gone completely all out, and in this top section we've got an absolute ton of I/O. So there are 4 USB 3.0 ports on there, all Type A. There's also a 3.2 Type C. You've also got a reset button, a large power button, and also there is a separate headphone and mic jack. Moving down, you can see we've got this full glass panel, and at the bottom there is this ventilation area. Now it's actually really clever what they've done with this particular design. All of the panels are pretty much interchangeable, so if you wanted your solid glass panel on one of the sides, you can take out the side panels and replace them. The side panels both have half glass, half ventilation, and there's also removable mesh on there as well for cleaning purposes and also keeping dust out. Another option, if you wanted to, Thermaltake do actually offer a small LED screen, so you can replace one of the front panels, either this one or the sides if you wanted to. I guess the front one makes more sense. It does have a built-in LCD screen. It's going to cost you somewhere in the region of about £100 for that optional extra. But if you want to go absolutely crazy, go to town with it and have lots of RGB and lots of information, including things like your CPU temperature, GPU temperature, and other things which are controllable in Thermaltake software, then it's definitely an option. Moving the case around onto the side, so we can see this ventilation here. So we've got a kind of 5/8 of glass, 3/8 of ventilation. Personally, I would have actually preferred to have seen this as being a 50-50, and later on when we look at some of the radiator options, you'll kind of work out why that is. When you're actually mounting equipment in here, because it is a kind of semi-inverted 90 degrees EATX chassis, then actually airflow is going to be kind of restricted in some aspects if you have it on this side, or if you have it on this side, it kind of misses out where the graphics card might be. But yeah, we'll take a look at that a little bit more later. The other side is exactly the same, so we won't bother taking a great deal of time with that. But the back section actually is very interesting in terms of what you can do here. So you've got a very large panel, and at the top you can see there is a pass-through here. So this is going to be a pass-through for your cables from your motherboard itself, because your motherboard I/O is going to end up in this top section. So they've given you a nice big cutout there to run your cables down. Underneath that, 2 thumb screws to remove this back panel, and there's also a very large magnetic dust filter, and moving that reveals this huge hexagonal mesh section here. So behind here is going to be where you've got options for mounting things like hard drives, SSDs, all that kind of stuff, and also obviously it is used as an exhaust. So there are 2 120mm fans included, and at the bottom we've got the cutout here for the power supply, which is actually a full-size power supply cutout for normal ATX power supplies, although in this configuration it looks tiny. Removing the back panel is very easy to do, so there's just 2 thumb screws, so loosen those off and you can pull this panel off. And you see it's very well made, very strong, very sturdy. This whole thing is actually very, very heavy. It's somewhere in the region of about 15 kilos, just empty, so yeah, it is a little bit on the weighty side, so do bear that in mind. So looking closer inside, we've got 2 areas here for mounting drives. So these cages are all removable, again, all modular, again, think Meccano, that kind of stuff. And also you've got the fan mounting sections here. The fan mounting sections, you can actually put, if you want to, a 140mm fan instead of a 120. They've included 120s, but obviously you can change those out should you wish to. And you can mount them either in front or behind. If you mount them in certain areas, you could if you want to squeeze more drives in there. These particular cages here, you can mount 2 SSDs or 1 hard drive behind there. And this whole section is also removable. Again, on thumb screws as well, which is always a nice thing to see, and they are captive ones, which is actually quite handy because in this position they are a little bit difficult to get to. So undo the 2 screws, and then this section just pulls out and is held in with 2 metal brackets at the bottom, so you can get a closer look at that. So if you imagine, you can put 140mm fans in there should you wish to, and for the actual drive cages themselves, you can see there's a couple of screws on there, so you can take off the top section if you wanted to and just mount a drive underneath. But giving you an idea on this side, so 3.5-inch drives on this bottom part and 2.5 on the top. Really, I'd probably say just put 1 drive in there, but you can squeeze 2 in. So now we can get a closer look of what is going on behind here. So this is obviously the back of your motherboard tray. So we've got a huge cutout here, so if you are doing custom cooling and you've got a custom backplate, you've got really nice easy access to that. Although obviously not quite as easy as it would be with a traditional ATX case, because you do have to remove the drive cage and the fans, etc. And if the fans are wired up, then again, that may potentially be a slight issue. Although realistically, once it's built, the chances of you actually wanting to go in there on a frequent basis are probably quite minimal. Something which is really nice is the actual grommets and things. So lots of grommets to run your cables through, and there's lots of cutouts and punch outs. So depending on your configuration, it's going to be pretty straightforward to manage your cables, all that kind of stuff. There is going to be a relatively large section here, which is going to be left empty. So if you wanted to, you could put things like the Thermaltake controllers or fan hubs, all that kind of stuff in there, tuck that out the way. Then here you've got a removable cage for your power supply. This, I feel, is probably a little bit unnecessary. Some people may disagree. All you've got with that is 2 screws, 1 on each side. This cage comes out, attach your power supply, slide it all back in, do the 2 screws up. It would have been easier, in my opinion, just to be able to put a power supply straight in, but okay, let me know what you think in the comments. Turn it around on the side slightly, you can see what I mean about the airflow. So in the default configuration from the factory, you can see this ventilated section here is kind of half and half. So half of it is towards the rear side of the case, and this very tiny slither here is towards the front. So you may find for airflow purposes, you may want to take these out and actually rotate them 180 degrees. So this ventilated section is on the front, although that does change the whole look of the case in my opinion. Next up, we're going to take a look at the top section. So the top section, this is actually a really nice design for filters. I do like this a lot. So there's 2 sections each side, and just press it in and it pops unlocked. And it means then you can pull out the entire section. The actual filter in here is fixed in, it is screwed into place, so you can't actually physically remove that. So you are going to be needing to get the vacuum cleaner on that every now and then. But certainly, massive airflow options there. It's just one huge mesh. So out the top there, natural convection out the top. That is absolutely perfect. I like that a lot. And with the filter out of the way, now you can get a better look inside. So we've got all of our I/O cable management stuff going on up here. Lots of options again for mounting drives or radiators in various positions. And if I pull this cable out of the way, you can see now where your motherboard is likely to be. So you've got your kind of I/O section here, and also then you've got your removable PCI Express blanking plates here for your graphics cards, expansion cards, all that kind of stuff. Clearly, if you want to, you can mount fans in this top section to aid with the airflow. Obviously, natural convection with a couple of fans in there just to help things on their way is going to be really good. So you've got an option there of two 140s, two 120s, or if you want to, 280mm or 240mm radiators. When it comes to 280mm radiators, do check your measurements, because even though it says 280mm, generally they tend to be a little bit longer because of the pipe work, etc, etc. So do bear that in mind. You can, if you want to, put a single fan towards this section. So if you wanted a 120, you can make it a little bit kind of lower towards the motherboard and the VRMs and all that kind of stuff. If you're going to be doing water cooling and you don't have any additional cooling around the actual pump head and your VRMs, you might find an extra fan in this position quite beneficial to keep the VRMs nice and cool. Taking the side panels off and all that other stuff, you do have to remove this plastic cover. There is actually like a grab handle on the top, like I said, where the I/O goes through, so just give it a little bit of a push and this whole section comes out. Luckily, the front I/O is not captive, so it's just a pass through there, so you can take this off quite easily and not have to worry about disrupting any of your cabling. So now with that top section out of the way, we can remove some of these glass panels and give you a closer look inside. So taking the panels out, actually quite simple. There aren't any grab handles or any kind of obvious means of pulling them out, so it's literally a case of just sliding it out. So push it up slightly, they do lock into place, and there is lugs on the side which lock in, so that's relatively straightforward to do. And then you can see inside much better. So giving you an idea of the kind of modularity or the way you can swap things around, I'm going to take out the side panel on this side, and if you look at that, so again you've got the kind of 5/8 glass, 3/8 of mesh and ventilation there. The ventilation actually is a pretty decent setup, so you've got these removable filters. They are magnetic, so it just slots in the bottom there and falls into place, so that's really good. Lots of glass in here, so it is going to be one of those things, if you are in an environment where there's either vape or smoke or dust, that sort of stuff, you're probably going to find taking these out quite often, but yeah, that is a part of things with a glass PC case. You can, if you want to, like I said, you can put this in the front section. So if you wanted to, you could put it here, and that locks into place, so you could have the ventilation on that side. Alternatively, if you want to, you can, like I said, flip it around 180 degrees and slot it in that way. So again, lots of options in terms of what you can do with air cooling. If maybe you've got a radiator in this front section, you want to have some air being pulled in through here, no problems. Would have been really nice to have these maybe a little bit wider and possibly actually have fan mountings on them. I think that would have been a really clever idea and actually would have kind of removed the need for those other mounting brackets. But again, not entirely sure why they haven't done that. I guess there is a good reason. Maybe it's something to do with the manufacturing, but I think it would have been quite a nice idea to put some fan frames on there for that particular purpose. We'll now take off the last one. And again, you can see, so this is exactly the same as the other one. And like I said, they are completely removable and replaceable, so if you want to, you can take one off one side, put it on the other. So this is now with the mesh on this side. If you're going to mount a radiator in here, this is probably how you're going to end up putting it, because you can have your motherboard, etc. here, the radiator in here, using these brackets. So these brackets have got various mounting options on them. There are, as you see, slotted sections there, so for mounting fans, etc. So you can either attach this straight to a radiator, or using the little pin on the bottom, you can just find one of the little rubber holes and put it in place, and you can just lock it in and put your fans there to blow straight out through these sections. Again, because it is a square or oblong case, depending what angles you're doing things, not everything's always going to look great. So depending on the angles, the graphics card, if you think about it, is going to be coming down here. Now graphics card wise, you can fit up to a 355mm graphics card in here. I've actually tried putting in a 5700 XT triple fan setup, and it kind of comes right down to the bottom. So yeah, you can get triple fan cards in there. Ideally, it's probably more suited to dual fans, but again, 355mm is what you've got to play with. In terms of CPU cooling, because of actually how much room you've got here, you can actually install a CPU cooler of up to 275mm in height. Now, if you bear in mind that most CPU coolers are somewhere in the region of about 155 to 170mm, 170 being kind of the biggest ones on the market. You've got another 100 millimeters to play with here. So yeah, plenty of room in that regard. So potentially you could actually have a air-cooled CPU and a water-cooled GPU quite easily and still have a little bit of room to play with. So now we've got the glass out of the way, let's take a look at the some of the more modular aspects of this. So the bottom section here, although you've got all these pass-throughs and you've also got mounting areas here, so if you want to, you can stick a hard drive on there or there. There are rubber grommets there to get rid of vibrations, etc. But really, this section here is quite unique in the fact that you can actually remove the basement in its entirety. So a couple of screws on the front, so you can take those out, and with the screws removed, you can just lift this section out and pull it out. It latches in with some lugs at the back there, and again you can see the perforations there for ventilation. You're probably wondering why there's ventilation on there. Well, it works in two ways. Obviously, if you're putting hard disk drives on there, you've got some natural convection going up through to keep your hard drives cool. But essentially what it's designed for is actually this bottom section, which you can see with the mesh there, does actually have a mounting area for fans on there. So you can put a 240mm radiator or two 120mm fans actually on this back plate, which we'll take a look at shortly. So this is going to be taking fresh cold air in through the bottom there. Then it's going to be coming into your power supply basement section, and then natural convection is going to pass the air straight out through this ventilated bit and then into the main chassis. So in terms of airflow, if you think of it as being intake at the bottom, coming up through the chassis and then being exhausted out through the top and also from the back from those two included 120mm fans, that's a general kind of outlook of how the airflow is likely to be. Now, some of the things, obviously thermodynamics do come into play with this because it is a kind of square-ish box section. Airflow is always going to be a little bit challenging because of the fact that most PC cases are traditionally quite narrow, so there's a narrow path of air to go through and pass through the system. So with it being a wider or more bulky area with more mass, it's going to be losing air pressure as you go through. So ideally I would say this is probably best used for water cooling, where you don't have to so much worry about actually getting air in and out. It's more of a case of the water is going to absorb some of that thermal mass and then exhaust it wherever it can do. When it comes to air cooling, you are going to have to think carefully about your airflow paths, just so you don't actually make the airflow worse than it would naturally be. If you want full access to this bottom section, again, just another two screws and you can take this unit out as well. So again, these are both identical, so you can swap them around should you wish to. There is an absolute ton of room in the bottom, so even if you're using a power supply that isn't modular, or maybe you've got an absolute ton of pipework, fittings, Molex connectors for pumps, etc., there's a really good place where you can store it all in this bottom section. It's very open, and also it's fully meshed and filtered as well. So there is an additional filter down here at the bottom. So again, you can take some air in through there, and also this power supply section here. You can put a power supply in here of pretty much, well, as big as you want, because there's an absolute ton of room. Clearly, if you're putting a radiator in here, you might want to bear that in mind, but generally most power supplies up to around about 180mm are going to be absolutely fine. Also at the bottom, there's this section here, which is strengthened and a little bit thicker. So if you want to mount in some water cooling pumps, there are mounts already there, directly ready for Thermaltake's own pumps and distribution box, that sort of stuff. Or if you just want to put a D5 in there, it's absolutely fine. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at what goes on down here. So to remove these sections here, there is a single thumb screw, and you loosen that off and this bit comes out, giving you full access. And again, as with everything on this case, it's all filtered. So there is a filter you just pull out there so you can clean that off, wash it, etc. If you wanted to, for the optimum airflow, if you're not too concerned about dust, you could just remove these altogether to give a kind of completely open section. So you can do that if you want to. And as with the glass panels, those are all interchangeable. So again, you can use Thermaltake's own LED display, which is about £100 here in the UK at the moment. A little bit extravagant, but if you're building something like this as a show PC, then I think an extra £100 probably isn't the end of the world. We should talk about price. I haven't discussed that yet. At the moment here in the UK, this retails for somewhere in the region of about £200. Now, at the time of filming, which is beginning of July 2022, there's some crazy things going on in the world, as you may or may not be aware. If you're looking back on this, you may find the case is significantly cheaper, or you may find it's significantly more expensive because of transportation costs, which appear to be kind of ongoing due to the way things are at the moment. We are currently experiencing somewhere in the region of about 20% inflation. So yeah, don't be surprised if you see this by the time the video comes out as being 220, 240 or even more. Potentially if things get better, obviously it will drop, but just do bear that in mind. There will be links in the video description for both UK sellers and also for Amazon around the world, etc. So do check those out for current pricing in your region. We'll just take out the last one of these now. So again, the bottom section is effectively all kind of open if you take into account the filtration. So really nice, really open, and from this angle now you can see straight through. There's a huge amount of room here for storing things and cable management, keeping things tidy. You can also see now there's a couple of screws on the side. So a couple of screws out of each side of this bracket. The whole bracket can be removed. Again, you can install your radiators, or you can install fans, or alternatively, if you want to, you can install, like I said, that Thermaltake LCD screen and still have a couple of fans behind it if you want to. It is bizarrely so modular. It is kind of scary how much flexibility there is with this particular case. So on the bottom, we've got this removable filter for your power supply. Nice that that's on a nice plastic sled. Works very well. Again, more ventilation here. There is a removable magnetic filter, which just pulls out, okay, specifically shaped to fit in that location. So not probably the easiest of things to get to once you've got everything installed, but certainly it is there, better than nothing at all. And yeah, I think that is going to be pretty much it. So you can see there is an absolute ton of flexibility, modularity, whatever you want to do. I imagine there's going to be people that are going to mod the bejesus out of this, which you certainly can do. Although, for those that just want to buy something which is a little bit different and just have a play and try out different configurations, it definitely does serve up as being the ideal chassis for that. Where the Thermaltake Tower 100 failed, because that was an ITX, so you had your limitations of ITX motherboards and just the sheer capacity of it, being the fact that this will take both extended ATX, ATX, micro ATX, and even more so if you take out the basement section. If you've got a motherboard which has an extreme overhang, you can still fit it in there as long as it doesn't go any further past the power supply. So motherboard wise, yeah, there are a ton of options there. Yeah, there's not really much more I can say apart from the only restriction to this that I can think of really is your own imagination and potentially how much money you've got to spend on the parts to actually fill the thing. Speaking of which, that is something that I should do right now. So we're going to get a build done in this, do some tests and see what it's actually like. Okay, so the build is all done and unfortunately I didn't record it. I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I think I would have probably got banned from YouTube for the expletives that were being used. But actually at the end it's come out and it's turned out pretty nice. Hopefully you appreciate it. I've gone for a somewhat kind of minimalist look here, so we haven't gone completely to town with fans, etc. All I've tried to do is to kind of almost replicate what the case would come as in a stock configuration. So I haven't actually used the two fans on the rear. I've substituted those for two fans in the front, which I've added a little bit of addressable RGB bling to as well, just to kind of lift it a little bit. And actually saying that, I do really like the way that the RGB down in the bottom section actually diffuses nicely through this grille section and also into the power supply basement area. I think it gives a really, really nice look to it. It's not overly RGB, it's not in your face, but it still has a kind of little bit of depth and a little bit of glow to it, which yeah, I really appreciate. Getting used to actually doing the build in the orientation is, if you're relying on muscle memory, if you've built a lot of PCs, there'll be a few times where you have gotchas where you kind of wire cables through to certain places and you'll be like, oh, actually, no, it's 90 degrees rotated, so these cables need to be over here, or these need to be over here. And that is something actually to bear in mind. If you're using a lot of addressable RGB, if you're using a lot of cables to connect up to particular hubs, that kind of stuff, because of the physical size of this, some cables won't stretch. Part of the reason why actually I mounted the radiator in the top, rather than putting some extra RGB fans in there, or actually putting RGB fans in the side, in the brackets, purely because just there's nowhere to put the wires or they won't stretch. It is a massive case, it really is huge. In the Tower 100, obviously not so much a problem because it is a compact version of this. Lord knows what they did in the 900 series. I'd imagine they used an absolute ton of extension cables. And extensions are something which you may want to consider actually even just for your power supply. The particular power supply I've used in here is a pretty decent one, Silverstone, and it has got modular cables. But I did find it a little bit of a stretch trying to get it from the power supply down the bottom here into this top corner. It did fit and it managed, although it is kind of going straight across the back. So if you're looking for slightly more tidy cable management, or you're putting a ton of drives in behind here in the caddies, then you are going to have to take that into consideration. You may need extensions for that. But again, that is part and parcel of if you're doing a build in a case which isn't entirely adhering to the ATX form factor standard. You do have to take into consideration that. So definitely plan out your build, make sure that you've got extensions for cables, and kind of even measure the cables. If you're looking at power supply, just make sure the cable is long enough, all that kind of stuff. That is generally quite boring stuff. Overall though, build quality, the actual tower itself, excellent. You can see at the moment I've actually removed the side panel here and the one here just to remove reflections. I've kept the one on the side. I have played around with a couple of different configurations of actually having the mesh on one side or the other, and actually I'm pleased to say it doesn't make a great deal of difference either way. This huge opening on the top does work very well for exhausting all the kind of heat that's building up, thanks primarily to the positioning of our radiator here, which works very well. The only thing I did find is these cables do look a little bit on the stretch side. Now I could have turned the radiator around 180 and had the pipes over this side, but that would have meant rewiring all the fans, etc. So yeah, it's just one of those things that I thought, no, I'm not going to do it, I'm going to go with it as it is. And just to highlight, obviously, some of the potential issues you may face depending if you're mounting in the top or whatever you're doing. Anyway, overall, yeah, very well, went together very well. Once I kind of got my head around it, not a problem at all. Absolutely acres of room in this basement section for the fans and also the power supply, extra cables, all that kind of stuff, and no worries there at all. The only thing I would say is because of the back section where you've got those drive caddies, etc., that could get really messy really quickly, so do take a little bit of time and consideration doing that, otherwise you will find it rather frustrating. For me, I use the up here hub for the fans, and I kind of got it at the moment sort of dangling halfway because some of the cables aren't quite long enough. Again, going back to thinking out your extensions, etc, etc. So let's get down to brass tacks. Do I recommend this case? That is going to be a difficult one. For the money and for the complexity of it, if you're a novice builder, I would suggest not doing it. If you're someone who's built a lot of PCs and has a lot of experience, I think you still actually will find a few gotchas, and there will be a few things which will catch you out that you're not expecting, purely because of the way this case is set up and the design, the rotated, inverted nature of the motherboard, all that kind of stuff. When it comes to flexibility, again, I would have loved to have seen proper brackets in the sides here for actually putting fans in, rather than being more water cooling kind of aimed. But certainly if you are planning on doing a water cooled build, you've got tons of room in there, loads of options. If you're doing a hardline water cooling loop, then again, you're probably going to have to do your measurements and redo them and just make sure that everything's going to be right. It's one of those things, it is almost like an art project. It's kind of, it works with you and you have to go with the flow and make changes. This isn't your traditional ATX style case where kind of it's a tried and tested thing. This is, it's a DIY project. You're building from the bottom up and working out what works for you and what doesn't, and adapting and overcoming. So for £200, it's definitely worth the money. You get your money's worth for sure. The build quality is phenomenal, it really is. Can't fault that at all. I just would like to see a few more options for mounting fans in here for an air-cooled build, but for water-cooled setups, or just for using it as it comes out of the box, which most people probably won't, but you certainly can do. Yeah, cooling-wise, yeah, can't fault it at all. So it's a weird thumbs up from me for Thermaltake on this one, for the Tower 500. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but if you like this particular kind of popcorn machine type design, I think it's going to appeal, especially now that it fits ATX and extended ATX form factors. But what I think about it isn't important, what you think about it is, so let us know what you think in the comment section below. But for now, I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.